Hello everyone, I am Vibha Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan Classes Funda Clear. So from this video, I am going to start class 9th Civics. So just as we had completed class 9th History and now I am going to start class 9th Civics. And in this video, we are going to discuss class 9th Civics chapter 1. And that chapter is what is democracy and why democracy? What is democracy? Why democracy? So in this chapter there are going to be two pillars or two questions that we are going to discuss. So first we will discuss about what is democracy. Now you all have been studying about democracy form of government since class 6th or class 5th. And now in this chapter we are going to discuss what is democracy and also its features. Step by step we will start with a simple definition and then we will discuss the features of democracy. And next part of this chapter is going to be why democracy. Now why democracy is the best form of government? Why do we need democracy? So in this chapter, and what makes it different from non-democratic, non-democratic forms of government, in this chapter we are going to discuss all this. So in a summary, we are going to discuss what is democracy, its definition and its features, and why do we need it. So let's discuss with our first topic, that is what is democracy. So first topic is going to be what is democracy. Now on the basis of your understanding, you can divide the forms of government into two forms, that can be democratic form of government and non-democratic forms of government. Now why do we need a definition of democracy? Now first we will use democracy and then why do we see the definition of democracy? Let's discuss. Now in your daily life, that in your daily life what you see? You use pan, you use word rain, you use word love or any other word, but you don't use its definition. First you use it, but why do we need definition? We need definition when we have to distinguish it from a particular thing. Like we use the definition of rain when we have to distinguish it from thunder or drizzling. So we use definition to distinguish one word from another word, and the same happens in democracy. Now we don't discuss the definition of democracy first. We discuss the use of it, the merits of it, and after that when we have to distinguish it from non-democratic governments, we use its definition. You could say that then we see the examples of democracy. So on the basis of your understanding, you could say that in democracy, what's the main feature is election. Now all the leaders are chosen by the people. So a simple definition of democracy could be democratic form of government could be a democracy is a government where leaders are chosen by the people, where leaders are elected by the people. Now this definition distinguishes to those governments which are totally non-democratic, like for example dictators like Pinochet of Chile, and you could say now Hitler of Germany. They were not democratic. They were not democratic forms of government. And also this implies to monarchs, like for example the kings of Saudi Arabia. Now the kings of Saudi Arabia are not chosen by the people. They are the rulers of that country because they are born in the royal family, and that's why they have become the rulers of Saudi Arabia. Now next example could be the army rule in Myanmar. Now the army rule in Myanmar was not chosen by the people. The troops had taken over Myanmar, and you know that the rulers had become, which were the controllers of army, you could say that. So that is it. Now the simple definition of democracies can distinguish the governments, the forms of government that are totally independent, that are totally non-democratic governments. But this definition is not, you could say that is not enough to distinguish those governments that are elected by the people but are not democratic. Now we have to see the meanings of each word in this definition. That is, democracy is a form of government where leaders leaders are elected by the people. Now there could be governments where election is done. Now many countries, in chapter 3 we will see that contemporary world nowadays what is happening, that now is craving to, that to declare itself, nations are craving to declare itself as a democratic form of government, and that's why elections are done, but still there is no democracy. Now we'll see the features of democracy, because we have seen a simple definition, but that cannot distinguish the forms of government which are non-democratic, but election is still being done in that nation. So let's discuss it. Now our next topic is features of democracy. So features of democracy. Now as we had discussed the definition of democracy, that is, a democracy is a form of government in which rulers are elected by the people. Now there are many questions that can be aroused from this definition. Now who are the people, who are the citizens who can vote, you could say that, and who are the rulers that can be elected, who are the candidates from it, and there are many questions. How should the election be done, and what is the form of government in this? So there are many questions in this definition that have been risen, and now we will try to answer those questions by seeing the features of democracy. So now we will discuss mainly 4 features of democracy, and we will see how those features connect to the definition of the democracies. Just as I said that to distinguish a non-democratic form of government from a democratic form of government, we have to understand the meaning of each word in the definition of democracy, the simple definition of democracy that we had discussed. So let us discuss the features of democracy, that are, first is major decision by elected leaders. So major decision by elected leaders. So now we will have to discuss, we will see the examples for the features of democracy, and then we will discuss the features of democracy. So in the Pakistan, in 1999, what happened in Pakistan? There was a general whose name was General Pervez Musharraf, and the General Pervez Musharraf, what he did was that in 1999 he overthrew the democratic, you could say the democratic party of that country, democratic government of that country, that was elected by the people, and declared himself as the chief executive of the country. So he declared himself as the chief executive of the country, and he was from military. He was a General Pervez Musharraf was from military, and he overthrew all the democratic form of government from the country that was elected by the people, and later on he designated himself as the president of Pakistan. So he became the president of Pakistan, and in 2002 he started a referendum where he was declared as the president of Pakistan. But many activists, many democratic activists, many media officials said that the referendum was based on fraud and malpractices, that was not fair for the common citizens of Pakistan. And now the General Pervez Musharraf was in power, and now what he did as president of Pakistan was that he started to pass many laws. Now he started to pass many laws, and in 2002 he passed a law that was legal framework. Legal framework law was made in Pakistan, was passed in Pakistan, and was introduced by General Pervez Musharraf. And according to that law, to that rule, what happened was that now the national and provincial assemblies were now under the control of National Security Provincial, you could say that, National Security Assembly, that was dominated by the military officers. So you could say that now the all power of the country had been dominated by General Pervez Musharraf. He was the only power of that country. Now what was happening in the politics of Pakistan was that now people were electing their representatives for the national and provincial assemblies But those elected members did not have any kind of power of decision making, because those had been under the supervision of National Security, the National Security Assembly, and that was dominated by the military officers, and that had to work under the supervision of General Pervez Musharraf. Now all the power was given to the General Pervez Musharraf. Now there was no value for those people, those representatives of people, of the citizen of the country. So that was it. Now there were elections that were being done, but what about the elected members? Elected representatives had no power of decision making, because all the final decision making power was declared by General Pervez Musharraf to himself. So now all power was given to him, and that's why you could say that the elections were being done in Pakistan, but that was not fair at all. So from this you could say that the first democracy, the first feature of democracy is that in a democracy form of government, the final decision making power has to be given to the elected representatives of people. Now all the power of final decision making should be given to those people, to those representatives who are representatives of citizens of that country. So that is the first feature of democracy. Now the second feature of our democracy is free and fair electoral competition. Free and fair electoral competition. So let us see the examples for this feature. Now free and fair electoral competition means that, for example, in China. Now in China what is done that in every 5 years elections are being held. Elections are being held for the president of China. But that election is not the right thing, is not a free and fair competition for all the candidates that are standing for the president of China, because a candidate can be standing in an election only if he is from a party that is known as Communist Party of China, or the other 8 smaller parties that have been allied to it. So the candidate must be from the Communist Party of China, or from the 8 smaller parties that are allied to it. So the candidate, if the candidate is from those parties, then only he can be a candidate for the election. He can stand up for the election for the electoral competition, and then he would go to the National Congress of China, that is known as Changao Renmin Daohi. That is a Chinese name, that is known as Changao Renmin Daiboi Daihi. So that is known as the National Congress of China. Now that is the Parliament of China, you could say, and there the president would be chosen, and it appoints 3,000 members. Now in the National Congress of China there are 3,000 members who appoint the president of China, but that candidate has to be from the Communist Party or from the 8 smaller parties that are allied to it. So you could say that is not at all the free and fair competition, free and fair electoral competition, because people do not have any kind of choice for them to choose candidates from other political parties, and that is why the second feature of democracy could be that in a democracy form of government, all political parties have the right to stand in a electoral competition. So the second feature of a democracy is that in a democracy form of government there is a need of free and fair electoral competition. So all the political parties, just like for example in India. Now in India there are many political parties that stand up in the election. So now the UP election and many other states elections are coming, and now you might have been seeing in news about those elections that many political parties are advertising themselves. So that is a feature of democracy. Now the third feature of our democracy is one person, one vote and one value. So the one person, one vote and one value. Now let us see some facts about some countries. Now in Saudi Arabia, till 2015, women of Saudi Arabia did not have right to vote. So the women of Saudi Arabia till 2005 did not have any kind of right to vote. And similarly, in Estonia country, that is a country, rules are made in such a way that the Russian citizens do not have any kind of right to vote. Their vote doesn't matter as much as Estonian people. And similarly, in Fiji country, now the indigenous people of Fiji, indigenous citizen of Fiji, Fiji's vote values more than that of outsider of Indian Fiji or any other country's citizen. So you could say that in those countries elections are being done, but the values of votes differ from person to person. It differs from gender, it differs from country to country. So there are many discrimination in votes as well, in elections as well. So that could not be called a democracy. Now in a democracy, every person must have the right to vote, because as we had studied in your previous classes, you might have studied that there has been a great struggle for universal adult franchise. Now universal adult franchise, that is right to vote for every person above the age of 18 years. So that there has been a very long struggle in many countries, almost all countries, for the universal adult franchise. So we had studied it in history and civics. But you know that, but still in many countries there are discrimination in vote. You could say that there is not a universal adult franchise. So that is to say that their elections are being done, but the right to vote should be given to each person as well, and their value should be each as well different. They should not be different as well. So the third feature of democracy could be, in a democracy form of government, each person has one vote, and each one vote has one value. So there should not be any difference between among the values of votes of each person. So that is our third feature of our democracy. Now the fourth feature of democracy is rule of law and respect for rights. So rule of law and respect for rights. Now that could be the fourth and last feature of democracy that we are going to discuss in this chapter. So now let's see for the example. Now here we are discussing first example, and then we will see the feature of democracy. Now in Zimbabwe, that is a country, it detained the independence. It detained the independence from white minority rule in 1930. And since it detained, it attended its independence from that minority rule, what happened was that there has been a ruling party that is known as ZANU-PF, Z-A-N-U, ZANU and PF. Now that party's leader is Robert Mugabe. Now the Robert Mugabe, ever since its independence, was ruling over the country. Now because this party was the main struggler for the independence of that country, of Zimbabwe, and that's why that party has taken all over the government. Now Robert Mugabe had declared himself as the president of the country, and now he was changing the constitution of the country. Now he kept changing the constitution of the country so that there would not be any kind of accusations on him. He would not be, could say, imprisoned for his life, and there would not be any kind of opposition of him. And that's why the basic rights of citizens were now being taken. For example, all the rights of media shows, of TV, of journalists, of radio were now under the control of that party, of that government, you could say. You could say that all the opposition party rulers, you could say all the opposition party rallies and marches were now disrupted, all their meetings were disrupted, and now journalists who were opposing this, who were opposing the government, the party that is led by the Robert Mugabe, now they were being harassed or even being killed by those government. So that was being done. The basic rights of the citizens, like right to expression, right to opinion, right to speak, all those rights were now being limited, were now being restricted by the government of Zimbabwe. You could say that all journalists, all the radios and all the TV shows that were under the version or that were the version of the government were only allowed, and all those who were opposing the government were not allowed, and even if they were allowed, they were harassed, their members were harassed, and opposition party was also facing the same thing. opposition party that was opposing the ruling party that is ZANU-PF. Now many members, their meetings were disrupted and there was a kind of disbalance among them. So you could say that in Zimbabwe, when that party took over the country and now kept changing acquisitions, now kept changing the constitution of Zimbabwe, so that president would be the most powerful person of the country. But still elections were being held. Now elections were being held, but since the power was given to the ruling party, you know that after the election, you could say that Robert Mugabe had become more powerful and now was doing as just he wanted. So you know that in an election, in a democratic form of government, the most important thing is that before election as well as after election, there should be seen some rights of citizens. Now the most important thing is to see the situation before election and after election. Now election is just not the most important thing, because after election that also matters. So the fourth and last feature of democracy could be, in democracy form of government, the elected representatives have to do work according to the constitution and the citizens' basic rights. So you could say that the citizens' basic rights, citizens are the most important people for any country. Now you know that democracy is defined as that democracy is a form of government that is elected by people, is for people and to people. So that is, you know that Abraham Lincoln, who was the president of America, who is the former president of US, said once that democracy is by people, for people and to people. So that you could say that democracy serves the country, serves the citizens of the country, not rules the citizens of country. And that's why citizens are the first priority of the government in a democratic form of government. So now that we have discussed what is democracy, now we have seen its simple definition, and step by step we have seen the features of democracy. Now let's sum up them. Now the simple definition of democracy is that a democracy is a form of government in which rulers are elected by the people, by the citizens of the countries. And there are many features, like first that the final decision making has to be by the elected representatives, and those elections should be fair and free, so that opposition party also stands a chance to rule over that country. And the third, you know that all those elections all those votes should be given all people by equal basis. And after election, the government has to do work in accordance with law, in accordance with constitution and the basic rights of citizens of the country. So that is, we have discussed the first pillar of this chapter, what is democracy. Now next pillar of this chapter, next question that we were going to discuss in this chapter is, why democracy? So now we are going to discuss the second pillar of this chapter. Now that we had discussed about what is democracy, we had seen the features of democracy, the simple definition of democracy. Now let us discuss why democracy. Now we'll see step by step according to our subtopics. Now first let us discuss about debating merits of democracy. So debating merits of democracy. Now there is a small story that is given in your book. Now that is, there is a school, there is a classroom, and there is teacher of those students, and now students are debating according to the arguments of democracy. Now a student is saying that democracy is the best form of government, as every person says. Now other students are criticizing him. So there is a story that is given that is not of much importance. Now you should consider the facts of the given stories, because the stories are given in your book to make it interesting, as well as to show the facts of those stories that is based on the chapter, the topic of the chapter. So let's discuss arguments against democracy. Arguments against democracy. Now there have been many arguments arguments that are against democracy. Now, as you know that, as I know that all of you know that democracy is the best form of government, but still there are many arguments against democracy. What are those? Let us discuss. Now, in democracy there is no stability. So those arguments are that the leader in democracy keeps changing, and that's why there is instability. And also, if there is instability, there is no morality as well, because the situations differ from each year, from each 5 years. You know that whenever elections are being held, because if there was another leader and now there is another leader, so the differences, there will be differences in their situations, in their thinkings, and that would impact the situation of the country. And also, there is argument that democracy leads to corruption as it leads towards the electoral competition, and that's why it is trying to show that whenever there is election, many candidates become corrupt for their electoral competition. They use money for people for the votes. So now they want votes from the people, and that's why they bribe those people, and thus they get their votes. So that is also done in democracy, that leads to corruption of the candidates. And another argument is that in a democracy, a citizen, what should he decide? It is not possible for him. He obviously makes mistakes in deciding which leader to choose as the ruler of the country. So there are many arguments against democracy. Now, if we open the whole book, whole history of democracy, now you could see many arguments against democracy. So now we will try to answer those arguments against democracy with arguments for democracy. So now, arguments for democracy. Now we don't say, I would not say that democracy is, that democracy is best for the country, but it is better than other forms of the government. Now, compared to the other forms of government, it's still the best for any country or nation. Now, it doesn't add poverty in a country or any kind of situation, but it is giving the opportunities to people to be equal. Now, in a democratic country, whether a person is poor or rich, official or any kind of businessman, all people are equal before law. Equality before law, you might have studied it. Now they have equal rights, equal laws are given for them, and now they have equal right to vote. So there is equality among them. So you know that in a democratic, you know that democracy is not best government, but compared to the other forms of government, it's still better. Now there are many arguments for democracy as well. Let's discuss those arguments. Now let us discuss. So as I've said that in democratic country, what happens that whenever people chooses any leader, whenever people choose any leader for their country, now it might be a mistake that leader is not as good as people thought, but still they have their chance. They can change that leader by elections, by making elections again held in those years, and thus that leader can be changed. But if there is any non-democratic form of government, what would happen that just as the ruler of that country says, that has to be done in the country, no matter what happens. Because there is a given example. Now in China, between 1958 to 1961, there was a famine that struck China, and that was the worst famine ever been recorded in world's history. So in the world's history, the worst famine that has ever been occurred was in the China between 1958 to 1961. Nearly more than 3 crore people, not 3 crore, that is about 30 million people died because of that famine. So that is a very big amount of people. That is a very big number of people that died in that famine. But you know that the economic conditions in India were also not good, were also not as better as China. But economists and ecologists and many activists said that, declared that conditions could be changed in China. Now there was difference between the policies of India and China. Just because in India there was democracy, so there was more better futures, there were more better policies in India. But in China there wasn't any kind of democratic rule, and that's why there were not as much as good decisions in the country. Because in a democratic form of government, the main agenda is the people's interest, and that you know that in a non-democratic form of government, people might say that they want that rule or they want equality, but it depends on the mood of that ruler of the country, of the non-democratic form of government. Because if he wants, then it would be given, it would be like granted for those people. But if he doesn't, then no matter what happens, it has to be done in the country. But in a democratic form of government, the government has to see the people's interest, and thus we could say that the first argument for democracy is, in a democratic form of government, there is better decision making, better policy making, that is of people's interest. And also in democracy, as we had said that in the arguments against democracy, that there is instability, that leaders kept changing, and there is a delay of time as well, because leaders keep changing and their minds were different for the policies, so it keeps delaying, the time is wasted. But we have to consider the fact that in democracy for arguments, that if there is a country, a big country of population like India, and there is so much diversity in India, as you know that India is a country with so much vast diversity, and that's why if there is a democratic form of government, then people from all over India, from all over the parts of India would be chosen as the candidates of parliament or any legislative councilman or assembly. Now all the different thoughts, interests of people would be shared, and when they are holding a meeting for policy making or for law making to rule over the country, now what would happen that all the interest, all the differences would be mixed up together, and now they would make a law that is considered that is considered good for all over the country, for all over the population, not just one person, not just one person or one part of the country, but all over the country. Because from all over India, people would come and they would share their ideas for their state. As for example, from each state, each member would go, chief minister would go, and now he will share his own opinion, and thus all interests would be shared, mixed up, and a common law would be made. So time has been taken, but you know that would lead to a better decision making, and that would also help in argument it is given that would also have to deal with the conflicts and differences of diversities, because in a vast diverse country just in India, that is very difficult to rule over all the country just with one law. That's why we have to see the diverse, we have to deal with the diversity and the vast diversity and conflicts between those people. Now there are many arguments for democracy. Not just we have seen the arguments democracy that leads to social and political life. Now the most important is the common people's interest. And the last argument is that democracy enhances the dignity of citizens. Just because you know that in non-democratic form of government, just as I've said that there is no dignity of the citizen of the country, because rules have to be made by the ruler. There is no share of the common citizen of any country, of the country. There is no that value of the interest of opinions, of views, of differences, of many opinions of the common people of the country, because the rulers do just as they want. So that is it. There are many arguments for democracy as well. Now that democracy is not is not perfect for a country, but is compared to the others, it's still better for any country or any nation. And that's why we have to choose democratic form of government, because it can make equality among people. As I just said that there will be equality no matter what person you are poor or rich, you have to right to vote. And slowly and gradually the situation would be different, because a change, a reform is not given, is not reformed. A country is not reformed just overnight. So that's it. Now we have discussed what democracy, and we have discussed what is democracy. Now the next and last topic of this chapter is broader meanings of democracy. So the broader meanings of democracy. Now this is the next and last topic of this chapter. Now we have seen this simple definition of democracy, the meanings of democracy, but that is to say for the minimal democracy. Now for a better understanding, for distinguishing a minimal democracy from a good democracy, we have to see the broader meaning of democracy. Now democracy is not just about that democracy is a form of government in which rulers are elected by people or chosen by people. It is just a simple definition for the rule up, for the government. But there are broader meanings of democracy. So let us just consider those statements that are given in your book. Like, we are a democratic family. All those decisions that have been made in which my opinion does matter as much as my father's. Now that is the first statement. So it is saying about a democratic family. Now democratic family means that in which the opinions of all family members matters equally. It is not just that the father's opinions matter so much and the son's doesn't. So that is wrong. So it is, that it is stating towards a democratic family. Now the next statement that is given that I don't like teachers who don't let us ask any question in the class. I would like to have a teacher with a democratic temperament. So here a student is showing his kind of democratic temperament. That you might have studied, you might have seen in your daily life that in a classroom, if there is a teacher, and now student will say that we want to have a democratic temperament teacher, because that teacher doesn't allow those students to ask their doubts, to ask their problems with that teacher. So that is a broader meaning of democracy. Now those statements, there are many statements that can be given and that you can think of. So now we have seen the broader meanings of democracy. Now democracy just doesn't mean the existing government, it also means a broader meanings. Like for example, the statements, true democracy can only come to a country when no citizen of the country would go with with an empty stomach to bed. Now the second statement that is given is that in a democracy the right to vote to all citizens is not equal, because we have to give equal education, equal basic information, and etc. Now if we take all these statements seriously, so there would not be any country with a perfect democracy, because in any country, just think of any country, all these possibilities are not possible, are kind of almost impossible. But we do have a minimal understanding of democracy. We don't have a kind of good democracy, but just a democracy that is minimal democracy for the country, but we do have a choice of having a good understanding of democracy. Now you have to see the broader meanings of democracy, not just the simple definition, because the most important thing for a country is the people's interest, the common citizens' interest. Now in democracy, what matters the most is our interest, the citizens' interest. Now that interest is not given, that right is not given, that is not given to the citizens in monarchs, in dictatorships, or a one-party rule. So that has to be said in the broader meanings of democracy. Now there could be many statements related to democracy. There is a need of more democratic society in our country. So that we have discussed about chapter. I have discussed all topics and subtopics. Now in this chapter we have seen the meaning of democracy, and there is a broader meaning of democracy that we will discuss in the next class, not just here, because in this chapter we are seeing some institutional features, and also some we will see in the chapter 3 and chapter 5. Chapter 5 in which we will see about the judiciary of the country. So now that's it for the chapter, and in the next class we will discuss more and more the broader meanings of democracy, how it can be used in different ways, in different views, in different fields. So I have discussed all topics and subtopics, and the next chapters of this class 9th history will be covered in the further videos. So thank you very much.